Hello and welcome to the first in the series of Masterclass videos for Helium. Now over the years I've done many videos on Helium, and over the years the interface has changed, which is quite confusing for anyone coming to Helium for the first time. And to expect everyone to plough through every video I've done to catch up is asking a little bit too much. So what I'm planning on doing is going over everything from the basics and working my way up. So let's start from the beginning and look at the interface. Now the interface itself was designed to work on the iPad and the iPhone, and on the iPhone obviously we don't have a lot of screen space, so I have deliberately kept the number of buttons on display down to a minimum, and there's a lot of things hidden behind these buttons. If you look closely, many of these buttons have a little chevron in the top left corner, and on some buttons this chevron is coloured blue. The menu button is a classic example where it has a chevron and it's blue. So just single tapping on the menu button will bring up the primary function, in which case it's popping up the main menu, and we can get to settings and everything from here. But if I was to long press the menu button, you'll see that there's additional options. So a chevron in the top right corner means when you long press, we get a secondary function, in this case the system toolbar. And because it's blue, if I swipe down on that button, it's toggling the MIDI through status. So a blue chevron in the top corner means it has a swipe function. Again, the play button has a chevron, which means if we long press it, we get to see additional options. Same with the Quantize. It has a chevron, so if we long press it, we'll get the Quantize options, which allow us to quantize selected notes. If we single press it, we get to be able to set up a quantized value. So I hope that explains why the chevrons and why sometimes they're coloured blue. So let's look at some of the different areas of the program and how to access them. Now I want to start with the media bay, because it's probably one of the most important things in the program. You get to the media bay by clicking this little button in the top right corner. Now the media bay is where you do all your file management, and there are three different sections in here: clips, songs and sessions. So the clips section is where all the tens of thousands of chord progressions are stored, and you can not only use the ones that we provide, but you can also add your own to this library. So if we click the D major folder, we'll see chords that are in the D major scale, and then if we click on triads, you'll see a number of chords. Now you can tap on any one of these chords or tap again to preview. Now the great thing about the media bay is all drag and drop, so you can simply drag and drop these chords out into the edit area to create your own chord sequences. Now if I press the undo and delete those three chords, we'll go back and have a look at some chord progressions. So if I click the double dot at the top here and go into the progressions folder, we can drag and drop complete chord progressions into the editor. We can also preview them as well. So that's the Clips tab. If we move to the Songs tab, this is an area where you can actually save the contents of your song as a MIDI file. So all we do is hit the export button at the bottom here, and we can export to that songs folder. The last folder is where we save complete sessions. It's similar to an AUM session, but unlike a MIDI file, we can save all system settings in the session file. Now Helium was designed primarily to run under AUM and to give us some of the MIDI compatibility that AUM doesn't provide. In Helium you have up to 16 tracks of MIDI data, which can be accessed using the track button up here. Now not only can you see the 16 tracks that we can access from here, notice track 2 has a little asterisk by it, which means it contains MIDI data. So selecting any track here will take us to that track, and notice that the colour and the name of the track are represented here above the mini piano roll. Now long pressing on the track button will reveal the output channel and MIDI port that we are sending to. So if you want to change the port or the channel that this track is outputting on, you can do it here. Now the number of ports that you see available there may differ depending on whether you've changed the option or not. By default I think it's configured with 4 ports, but if we long press on the menu button, this is where all the system settings are stored. You can see here the number of MIDI ports that are supported, and we can up that if we want all the way up to 16. Just bear in mind though, you've got to exit, restart the program for those MIDI ports to take effect. Now while we're in this configuration toolbar, I want to point out the option invert colours, which for those that want to flip white and black notes, you can do that in here. And you can change the contrast setting here for those like me that are a bit visually impaired in our old age. And I know some people have trouble seeing selected notes, so you can turn on this invert selection here, which helps viewing selected notes. So let's have a look at some basic note editing, because that's the fundamentals. That's where we all start. So to add notes, the first thing you need to do is make sure edit mode is enabled. Now this edit tool can be changed by long pressing on the edit button, but we're going to stick with the draw tool for now. Now the piano roll on the left here can be used as a guide. If you click anywhere within the piano roll, you'll hear an audible sound. And that sound's been generated by the instrument on that port and channel that we configured for track 1. Now if we tap, hold and then drag, we can lay a note. So I can lay multiple notes just by dragging left to right. Now you may not want the notes to sound as you play them, so if you don't want that, you can go into the settings and you can actually turn play edited notes off. Now to physically move a note, we have to tap on the start on the header of the note, and we can drag that to any new position we like just by tap, hold and drag. To alter the physical length, tap, hold and drag on the end of the note. While holding the note, you can even drag up and down to alter the note velocity. There are other ways to do this, and I'll explain those later. Now you can see the velocity either by the colour or by that length of the line that runs through the note. And finally, double tapping on a note removes the note. Now I hope you notice that while we add notes and even move notes, you'll notice that the notes are skipping in increments, and that's controlled by the grid. So we can always select a finer grid value like 1/16 notes, and then when we drag or add notes, we'll have a finer granularity to that movement. Now if you want to delete a set of notes, the easiest way to do it is to use the select tool. So if we click on the select tool, we can then drag a box around the notes we wanted to select, and then just hit the delete button in the left toolbar. And if we make a mistake, we can always press the undo button down here. Now if you want to copy those notes, you can drag a selection, but while I'm dragging, notice that little white bar on the ruler, and notice that it spans just 4 beats. And that bar represents the width or the length of the area being selected. So now if I head off into the clipboard and pick copy, I then reposition my paste cursor by clicking in the ruler and pick paste, you'll see that the amount of data copied is equal to that width selected. And I can also come back into the menu and do a duplication. Now that white line is an important guide, because if I go back and I select the first 8 beats, it includes 4 beats of empty space. So if I now go and copy that into the clipboard, touching the ruler to position the paste cursor and paste, it's going to include those 4 empty beats at the beginning. And again, when I duplicate, the 4 empty beats are going to be duplicated. Now let's backtrack a little and take a look at the other drawing options. If we long press on the edit button and select paint, then when we draw a note, that note will consist of multiple notes, which are the length that is determined by the grid size. So if we change the grid size to say half a bar and drag, you'll see we get multiple notes of half a bar in length. Now if we look at the third tool on that toolbar, which is the probability tool, when we select this and we tap and hold on a note, we can change the probability that this note will play or not. Now notice here I'm actually changing 2 notes at the same time because 2 notes are selected. It's a great way to change multiple notes at once, but be aware of that. Now I want to turn our attention to the controller lane. Now suppose we had a set of chords with lots of notes, as you can see here, and suppose I wanted to edit the velocity of all those notes. It would be very tedious to go through those one by one and manually edit them. Now this is where the controller lane comes in, and we press the controller button down in the bottom left corner to reveal the controller lane. Now the controller lane has its own edit, select, clipboard and quantize buttons. Important to note that. And if we click down here where you see the word velocity, just single click, you'll get a menu of controllers appear. So there are 127 continuous controllers you can choose from. But we're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to focus on the first one, velocity, which isn't necessarily a controller, but it's available within this lane. And the great thing is, if I want to fade in, I could just simply tap and drag along this velocity line to set each note to a specific velocity. Now because none of the notes were selected, it freely allowed me to set the velocity for all notes. But if I arrange a selection of notes, then drawing in this area down here will only affect those selected notes. So it's a great way of putting restraints on what you're editing. Now by default the paint tool is enabled, but if I select one individual note here and then change the tool to the draw tool, I can then just affect that one single note, and notice you get some feedback here as to exactly what value velocity that note is. So you can get extremely accurate with this tool. Now velocity is not technically a controller, but it's in this lane, as is things like pitch bend, aftertouch and program change. So the real CCs begin at bang select. The CC modulation, for instance, if we want to draw in some CC modulation, we can do that. Let me go back to the draw tool, or paint tool should I say. We can just simply tap, hold and drag to draw in a bunch of controllers. Now you notice that they're spaced quite liberally every 16th note, and that's determined by what we call the quantization. And if we decrease that or increase that quantization to say a 64th note, and try doing that again, you'll see that we get a lot more definition on those controllers. So basically with this tool, if I just overwrite, it will replace exactly what was there before. Now if I long press on the edit button, I can then choose something like the eraser tool and just drag over an area to completely erase it. So that's one way of erasing things. Now we also have another clipboard menu down here, and this is important because that's a separate clipboard functionality for the controller lane. So I'm going to paint in some controllers again. And my apologies for being a little crooked here. I'm trying to use the touchpad on my iPad and it just isn't good for this kind of thing. Now I'm selecting the ruler tool. Now the ruler tool is great for doing really smooth ramps, so you just click, hold and drag, and then when you release it will set those controllers up. So that's a great tool for fade ins and fade outs. Now the selection tool works just as you'd expect. You can just drag an area of controllers, and when I let go they'll be selected. Now it's quite often useful to say set the quantize to say a quarter bar so that we can accurately select an area of controllers. So I can select 8 bars exactly there. Now I'm going to select 4 bars here. I'm going to hit the clipboard button. Now don't forget there's a separate clipboard button, and I'm going to be able to duplicate from this particular clipboard menu. So just remember, anything that's down below there, it's a separate select, quantize and clipboard. Now the controller lane is not very tall, but if we long press on the controller button we can expand the height of the controller lane so we can get more precise editing. Also, if you long press on the controller button again, you can turn on a local ruler. Now the controller lane itself can be used for doing more than just editing controllers and velocities and so on. If we revert back to the default state showing velocity, you'll see this velocity button at the bottom. If I long press on that, we can switch modes, so we can switch to chord mode. And it's chord mode I want to look at next. Now as we could see from previous examples, when we drag and drop a MIDI clip into the editor, we end up with quite a lot of notes. It's a lot to manage. A far easier way of managing a song is to use the Chord Track. And the Chord Track is available, as we've just seen, via the controller lane by long pressing on the velocity button and switching to chord mode. Now to manually add a chord to the Chord Track, make sure the tool selected is add chord, and all we need to do is simply hold, drag and release to add a chord. Now you can tap, hold and drag that chord to any new location, and if you tap on the very end piece, end marker, you can resize. If you tap and hold on any chord, it will bring up the chord definitions dialog. From here we can reconfigure a chord and set its root and its chord type. Now this is a scrollable list and there's a good number of chords in here, probably more than you'll ever need in your life. You can even set the chord inversion from this option. You can set the slash note here, and you can set the octave. You can change the chord velocity, so if I change that to 50%, you can see that reflected below. You can specify that the chord is unrooted, in other words it drops its root note. And finally you can set a number of divisions on that chord. Now don't forget, if you want to do any clipboard functions on these clips, to use the local clipboard options and not the ones further up which are for notes. So for instance, if we want to make a selection here, we can make a selection and then duplicate these chords. All the clipboard options work on this lane, and can be used for manipulating and copying groups of chords around. So if I assign each of these 4 chords its own unique settings, Then once we have done that, we can click on each of the chords in turn to go through the contents, or what the configuration. So let's zoom out a little bit, ensure we're on track 1, which we are, and I'm going to long press that, and you can see that the output is currently going to channel 1, port 1. And you see this next option is called Ghost Track. Now we can set this option, this Ghost option, to show the contents of the global chord track as notes. This is really handy, but I'll stick that back as it was. Now if we were connected to an instrument and we played this back, we wouldn't hear anything, and that's because the overall chord track feature is turned off, as you can see down here. And this needs to be turned on before any track can send any chord track information out to a destination instrument. So now if we long press again on the track button, we'll get additional information appear in this toolbar, which is applicable to the chord track now it's been turned on. Now as you can see here, the track 1 is using the global track, but we could quite easily toggle it to use the local chord track. And we're also sending notes, but we could send tone packets if we wish. You can find a video specific to tone packets on my channel, so check it out. So we mentioned before, you can have global or local chord tracks, and we can click down here to set up which chord track we're actually following. So essentially each track can have its own local chord track, which is much more flexible than just having one single global track. And as you can see here, I'm actually copying the chords on the global track, and what I'm going to do is delete that existing chord, position the paste cursor by clicking in the ruler at beat position 2 and pasting that in there. And now we're free to make minor modifications to these chords, or even create completely different chords by adding and removing notes. Now one thing worth mentioning is if I press the expand button here, you'll see 3 extra buttons appear at the bottom of the dialog. Now these allow us to manipulate things like drum machines by selecting patterns, strummer by selecting patterns, or manipulating the arpeggios, turning them on and off and such like. So we can actually select an app, and then we have 2 controllers for each app, so we can enable and disable various features on a per chord basis. Now if you want to send these control parameters to an instrument but you don't want to actually play a chord, you can click on this definition type and turn it into a controller only block, and that will just fire off the controllers rather than send chord information. Now right now the definition type is set to chord, but if I start clicking on this keyboard below, I want you to notice that the chord type has now changed to cluster, and the word modified is there by the side of the chord name. If I remove those additional notes and go back to the original chord, you'll see the word modified disappears and we return back to sending chords. Now these clusters are very handy for adding embellishments to chords, or for adding additional chords that don't exist in our extensive chord library. If you forget what the original chord was before you made the modifications, you can just click on the chord definition type and go back to chord, and it will revert back to its original state. Okay, so let's go right back to basics and show you how to connect a copy of Helium to a sound source using AUM. Now the first thing we need to do in AUM is click the little plus and add a MIDI track. Click to add an instrument. Now tap on Audio Unit MIDI Processor, and in here you can search for Helium, and we click on Helium to add it to that particular MIDI channel. Now at this point I want to click on this little hamburger menu next to Helium, and I want you to notice here that we have 12 ports and a control out port. Now earlier in this video we showed you how to configure these ports, but I just want to make sure you know where they are. Now if I open Helium and then long press on the menu button, this is where we set the number of ports that are exposed and can be used by other programs. Now since Helium's a MIDI processor and can't actually make any sound itself, we need to load an AUV3 in by clicking this little circle here and selecting audio unit extension. Now in here I can pick anything. I'm going to try and find pure piano and click on that. Now we have a copy of pure piano, we need to route it so that it's taking its input from Helium. So click on the hamburger menu to the left of pure piano, click on Helium, and then what we want to do is click on port 1, and a little tick should appear on the right of port 1. Now if we return back to Helium, you'll notice that we're currently looking at track 1. Now what I'm going to do first off is find a MIDI sequence from the MIDI clip library, and we're going to try dropping this clip both into the chord track and at the same time into the note editor and listening to the differences. So let's start by dragging a clip into the note editor. We'll go for this one. So I'm going to drag that in at bar 2 and release, and you'll see the notes of the chord there. Now the first thing you need to do is make sure sync is turned on, and that ensures Helium is following the host transport. Now we can press play in AUM. So as you could hear there, pretty uneventful chord progression. But what I want to do now is undo, delete those notes, and drag this, or a clip, another clip, down and into the chord editor, the chord track, and try again. Now we didn't hear anything, and the reason is because globally chord tracks are turned off. So we need to click down here on the global and turn them on. Now that's a master setting to turn on and off chord tracks, but if we come into the chord options, first of all we'll make sure we're on port 1. We'll need to turn on locally on turn the chord track on and make sure we're following the global chord track and we're sending notes. Now let's try again. Now one important thing we haven't touched on is the ability to record performances directly into Helium. Now many of us will want to record songs in small chunks, in which case loop points are very important. Now a loop point is just an area which we define with a start and stop position within our song where we can record MIDI notes and it keeps looping over and over again. And we define that by just tap, hold and drag in the ruler, as you can see here. Now once we have a loop defined, we can click anywhere within that and drag it to a new location on the ruler. We can also tap at the beginning of that and extend it, and tap at the end and extend it or shrink it. And again we can move that to any location. But I'm going to leave it at two bars, and what I'm going to do is if I press play now, you'll see that the actual cursor does not stay within the bounds of loop because loop mode is not enabled. You need to enable this loop button here. Now when the host transport is playing, it will get to bar 3 and cycle back to bar 1, which is what we want. To remove the loop, just double tap and double tap again to bring it back. Now if we want to make a recording, a linear recording without any loop, just a whole performance, we'd turn the loop off, we'd hit the record button, we'd rewind and play, and then we would play in our performance, and you'll see it gets recorded into the editor. If you make a mistake, just hit the undo button and try again. Now loops are probably better because you can focus on a small part of the song up front. So I'm going to turn the loop point back on, and the best thing to do when you're recording a loop is to set a count in, and I'm going to set a 1 bar count in and then record a set of block chords. Now wait for the count in and start playing. Now you'll notice that as you play, these chords are input, and when the play cursor hits the end of the loop, it'll start back from the beginning. It will play what's already recorded, and you can, if you want, record over the top. So if you want, you can record the block chords and then a bass line and then a lead over the top if you want. You wouldn't necessarily do that all on the same track though. The important thing to take from this, you can carry on accumulating notes even after it's looped. Now when you perform a recording, it's going to snap to whatever quantize setting we have currently set. I'm going to zoom in to these notes, and you'll notice that all of them are snapped to the quarter note perfectly. That's because the quantize setting is set to a 16th, so it means when we're recording notes, if they're within 1/16th of a beat, it shifts them to the nearest beat. Now I'm going to set the grid slightly finer than it is now. It's currently set at quarter note, but let's for argument's sake set it to 1/64th and slightly shift this note out of kilt. Now let's tap on the quantize and change it from a 16th to a quarter beat, which is a bit ridiculous, but it'll demonstrate what I want to demonstrate here. Notice also note ends were enabled. Now if I long press the quantize, I can choose to quantize all notes. Notice the note I moved out of place jumped back into place, but also notice all the note ends snapped to quarter notes. If you don't want any snapping at all on the note ends, you can turn it off in here, and if you don't want any quantization at all, you can turn it off here too. So quantize is something that's applied during a record or manually after record if you wish. Grid size, on the other hand, is something we can change to control how finely things move when we drag them within the editor. So if I set the grid size to 1/8 of a beat, I can drag in 1/8 of a beat intervals. Now one important thing is track naming, because we can't refer to tracks as just track 1, 2, 3 and 4. So to apply a name, what we do is we drag our cursor up to this track 1, where it says track 1, just above the piano roll, and just long press on this, and we can clear that and add a title as we wish for track 1. Now notice as I bring up the track selection dialog, they're actually named, so it's easy to work out which track is which. So I've switched to track 2, and we're just going to name track 2. Again, long press on the track name, hit delete, type in your new track. Now that's just one of two ways of setting track names. The other way is to open up the mixer, which is down here, and again if we long press on the track name in here, it will pop up the same dialog for us to name that track. Now we haven't talked about the mixer, but we'll talk about that in another masterclass video. So assuming you've recorded a masterpiece, you'll want to save your data. Obviously the data is automatically saved within the host as part of the saved session, but if you want to back it up, the safest way is to go to the media bay, make sure you're on the sessions tab, and then press the save session button, and you'll get your save dialog come up, and you can just give that any name you wish and hit save. Now that will save a session. That's everything within Helium in one single file. If you want to save a MIDI file, you can switch to the Songs tab and save your file in here. Now that's saving it in MIDI file format, which can then be dragged and dropped into another app if you wish. If you want to back these files up, you can bring up the Files app, and you can simply drag and drop directly from the media bay into the Files app. So you can back up your sessions, your MIDI clips, or your MIDI files, exported MIDI files, this way. Now, not only can you drag files out of the media bay into the files folder, you can also drag them back again. So if you've got a bunch of MIDI clips that you've downloaded from the internet somewhere, you can drag and drop them into the Clips tab. Now, before we conclude this video, I want to point out that all my apps, if you go to the main menu, have a help manual. And at the top of the help manual are links to many other tutorials that I've done over the years. The only problem is some of these tutorials are now out of date, so the UI looks slightly different now, which is why I'm starting doing a masterclass and going back to revisit some of the old functionality. Now, while these videos might be outdated, they focus on specific topics, and there's a lot to be gleaned by watching those. So that concludes this video, this masterclass. Don't forget to thumb up the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.